pulling the last of my big batch of dough out from the fridge, and I'm gonna show you step by step how I shape this, let it rest, and bake it. Because I've gotten so many questions on, do I need to let this sit on my counter? Do I let the dough sit on the counter in the proofing basket? And so I'm gonna show you 2 ways to do it. One of them is that you're gonna let it proof on your counter once shaped. The second one is you can actually let it go right back into your fridge once it is shaped, and you can bake it straight from the fridge in your sandwich loaf pan, or you can just like dump it straight out of the basket and bake it from the fridge. When you bake straight from the fridge, if the dough has more of that like cold, it's cold. So then as all of that cold exits the dough, it is more moisture, and a lot of times if you're having a hard time getting your loaf to rise, you need to actually bake it straight from the fridge. So let me show you exactly what I do. First, take it out of the fridge, it's cold, and I know that this is the last loaf. Look at this, is a sour, this is a whole wheat dough that I made with a rye-fed starter. So it's a very rich dough, really flavorful. I'll link the video to how to make this dough at the end so that you can watch that too, so you can make it. But I want you to see what it looks like. So it a little bit sticks onto the side of the container, just a little bit, but it easily wipes off. And it smells so delicious. This dough has been resting in the fridge for at least a week. It's been at least a week. I don't remember, maybe a little bit longer. But here's the main thing. You're gonna take it out of the fridge cold. We're gonna work with it cold from the fridge. First thing we're gonna do is get our pan ready. And I'm using a cast iron loaf pan, and this is the 8.5 inch size. You can use a bigger one if you want. You can use a metal pan if you want, but if you're gonna bake straight from your fridge, don't use a glass pan, because glass pans, the change in temperature from the fridge straight into your oven could really cause a problem. It could make it shatter, especially if the pan has been used a lot, like it's a well-loved pan. Okay, so I just make sure that I get the sides oiled really well. And for this video, we're gonna make a sandwich loaf, because it is quite honestly the absolute easiest one, the easiest loaf to make straight from the fridge, because you don't have to transfer the dough into the Dutch oven. So our pan is well oiled. I get that done first so that it can sit up there, and we'll pull it off to the side. It's gonna wait for us. Now I'm gonna wash my hands because I don't wanna have oil on my hands. I do love to have a bowl of water off to the side, but just hear me when I say this. If your dough has gotten too sloppy to work with, it's okay to use flour. It's not preferred. You want to just use water when you're working with your sourdough, but the best thing, the first thing we want to get to, is that you can make a dough that you can easily work with like this. If your dough is not to the point that you can easily work with it, then it's okay, use flour until you get it to the point that you can easily work with it. So when you take your dough straight out of the fridge, it's cold, it's firm, and you should be able to easily handle it. Because there's a little bit of water on my hands, it doesn't actually stick to me at all. And this is the easiest loaf to shape, because we are just going to be doing a series of rolling so that it will fit into our pan. So the first thing I do, you just start rolling. This is why for beginners, I'm like, oh my goodness, start with a sandwich loaf, because you don't have to get the same like artisan shaping and scoring. I mean, when you start with a rustic loaf, that is like starting with like a new painter trying to go paint a Picasso or a Monet. Like, let's start with something that's easy, and the sandwich loaf is so easy. Now, the thing to remember is that the more tension you create, you're going to squeeze and push down on it. Squeeze and push down, squeeze and push down, because all of this tension is going to allow the sourdough to actually rise better. I know it seems counterintuitive, like we're squishing it to death. How could that help it rise? Sourdough is different than a yeasted dough. Yeasted dough, you don't want to squish all the air out of it because that is like part of the rise. But with sourdough, we are trying to get it so that it has tension. And as you can tell, it's getting to the point where I'm like, oh, it's hard to shape it. That is good. When the loaf starts to break apart like this, that tells me we have created some serious tension, okay? So my dough is still cold. It looks a bit crazy. Look at the bottom, crazy. But now what I'm doing is just getting it so that it's all together. I want it so that it still has like a nice look on the top. So I'm not gonna go the other direction this time. I just want to get it flat. Okay, she looks a little lumpy and crazy, but don't you worry about her. She is going to rise, and then we're gonna bake her cold. And it's amazing, once it starts to rise, it loses the lumpiness and it gets a really beautiful crust. So I am not going to bake her right now. Instead, I am going to cover it well with plastic wrap, and then it's going to go back into the fridge. It's going to live in the fridge for at least 2 hours, but it could be in there. If I don't have time to bake it this afternoon, I may end up just baking it tomorrow. And so if you're going to put it into your fridge, which I suggest putting it in your fridge, especially if you're having problems with your dough rising, or if your dough is very sticky, you cannot work with it very well, get it back into the fridge. If your dough is really sticky, it's having a hard time holding its shape, that's a sign going back in the fridge to proof is gonna be the best thing for it. Or you're like, I got it shaped today, but I don't have time to wait an hour and then bake. Put it back in the fridge. Once it goes into the fridge, it is going to stay in here. You gotta make space. It's gonna stay in there for at least 2 hours. If it sits on the counter, it only needs to be on the counter for 1 hour. Now, here's the thing. When you make yeasted bread, that final rise, you're waiting to see it double in size. Sourdough doesn't do that. So when you wait for it to double, you're actually getting your dough overproofed, and then it's not gonna rise very well in the oven. Sourdough does all of its rising in the oven, and it happens because it's working against that tension that you created. So if it's on the counter, you wait 1 hour and you bake. If you put it in the fridge, you wait at least 2 hours, but you could wait 24 hours or another day or two. Like, it can sit in that loaf pan in the fridge for a couple days, and then you bake it straight from the fridge. Okay, so that's your options. Option 1, on the counter, 1 hour. Option 2, in the fridge, at least 2 hours. Now, if you chose to shape yours as a rustic loaf in a Banneton basket, you can totally do that. You do the exact same thing, option 1, option 2, except one disclaimer. If you're gonna put yours in a Banneton basket and you're gonna put it back into the fridge, make sure that you have floured that Banneton basket so well, because you don't want your dough to stick to it. Also, I don't know that I would, I've never left my dough resting in a Banneton basket for more than a day, like overnight. So check yours to make sure. You just don't want your dough to stick to it, and the longer that the dough sits in the fridge, it creates a little bit of moisture and condensation on it. That liquid from the dough can start to weep out a little bit. That's what happens in the containers. Like, when I get my dough out of this container, sometimes there's a little bit of liquid around. That's normal and natural. And so if your dough is proofing in a Banneton basket, just check it to make sure that it's not sticking to the side. The loaf has been resting in the fridge overnight. because I didn't have time to bake it yesterday. So this is the cool thing about using the loaf pan, is you can prep it ahead of time. So my oven is on at 425, and because my loaf pan doesn't have a lid, which I really like, I don't want to deal with another thing in the oven or even having to store it. What I do is I put this old loaf pan that I really never bake with, I fill it with some water. This is gonna go next to it. Our little pan of water is in there now. Cold, straight out of the fridge, taking the loaf that we shaped yesterday. My pan is really cold, the whole thing, cold, cold, cold. Now let's do our little score on the top, and it's gonna go straight into the oven, cold, and you're gonna see how amazing it fluffs up. Remember, you're not waiting for this to double in size. Look, it doesn't look much bigger than it did yesterday. Sourdough does all of its rising in the oven. So you can see it doesn't rise a ton, but when it has been in the fridge proofing, it is so much easier to cut it. But what I have found is that it doesn't like burst open quite the same as if this was proofing on the counter, but we still want to give it a nice deep score so that it will have space to expand. And just remember, sourdough doesn't double in size. It does a little bit of rising as it's proofing, but it acts different than yeasted bread. Yeasted bread, you do want to see that double in size. Sourdough just doesn't act like that. It's going to do most of its rising in the oven. So let's pop it in there. I'm gonna put this in there right next to that other pan, and we're gonna set our timer for 40 minutes. Look at that. Here it is at 40 minutes. And what I'm gonna do is I like to check the internal temperature, even though it typically takes about 55 minutes for it to come up to the proper temp. So right now, the internal temp is saying it's only at 110. Having a thermometer is so, so helpful, because if you look at the top of the bread, you're like, oh, it looks great, let's take it out. But then when you do the internal temperature, you can tell exactly what's happening inside. And so a lot of times, I know that when I first started baking, I wasn't using a thermometer, and a lot of my loaves were coming out really dense and gummy inside because they just honestly were underbaked. But I had cooked it or baked it for the amount of time that the recipes had said. Every oven is different. Every loaf is slightly different just because of the way that it's shaped. So you'll get the hang of like, oh, okay, when I do an 800-gram loaf, it typically takes 55 minutes. That's usually how long it takes for ours. But when I look at it and I'm like, okay, it's only at 110 right now, and we need it to go up another 90 degrees. I'm actually gonna set the timer for 20 minutes, and then we'll come and take the temperature again and see where it's at. It's been another 20 minutes, and can you see that it is sitting right at 200 degrees. So when you put your thermometer in, you wanna push it all the way down to the bottom and then pull it up just a little bit so that you're not having it take the temperature on the very bottom of the loaf, but it's more in the middle. So now it is ready to come out of the oven. And look, the top didn't change too much in how dark it was getting. If yours is still not measuring 200 degrees, you can just put a piece of foil over the top if you feel like it's getting too dark and it needs to stay in the oven longer. But now we turn her out, and the bottom looks nice and golden too. And now the trickiest part, we have to let it rest before we slice it. Once the bread has fully cooled, then we slice. And this is my all-time
favorite bread knife, and there is a link to it below, along with all of the other tools that we love to use for the sourdough. But it just makes it so easy to cut really thin slices. But here we go. Here is the bread. Look at how much it fluffed up. And this is a really hearty loaf. The starter I made with rye flour, and then I made the dough with whole wheat, and oh my goodness, it's so soft and delicious. Make sure that for the 8.5-inch loaf pan that you're using 800 grams of your dough so that you get this nice big rise. If yours is not looking as big, maybe you're using a bigger pan and less dough. So make sure that you're using the same ratios.
So that's all the steps, from taking it out of the fridge, shaping, proofing in the loaf pan, and then baking. So I put all of those steps below, so you can even just go and look at them below so that you can like refresh your memory. And if you haven't made a big batch of dough yet, I actually put links below to show you how I did this whole wheat bread that I fed with rye. I fed the starter with rye flour to like help it get beefed up. So if you're having problems with your starter being weak, your dough being dense or gummy or sticky, watch that video and follow that one. If you want to make a big batch and you want to do like all-purpose flour, there's another link to that below, show you how to make a big batch. And I even make those. I make a lot of our dough in our stand mixer, and so I show you that below as well. But I'm so glad that we can bake together. I hope your bread turns out so delicious. We already ate half the loaf for breakfast, and this is the beauty of having it all prepped in your fridge, ready to go. Never would I be able to have sourdough bread early in the morning if the dough hadn't already been prepped and I hadn't already shaped the loaf. So put your questions below. All of your questions, we do our best to get to them, but they help us make our next videos. And did you know that when you watch our videos, you actually help us fight human trafficking? We donate 10% of all of our profits to Atlas Free from all of our business endeavors. So here on YouTube, if you join us at an in-person event, if you purchase our cookbook, any of those things, when you are part of Cider Press Lane and all that's happening here, you get to turn your everyday life making bread into a way to help people have freedom. So we're so glad that we get to do life with you, and I look forward to baking with you again soon.